Before we begin tonight's descent into strange goodbyes, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, and if you're feeling quietly awake, leave a comment below, telling me what time it is where you are, and what part of the world you're listening from. I always find it oddly comforting, knowing who's out there, floating in the same darkness. Now, settle in. Dim the lights. Lie back. Let the hum of sleep begin to rise behind your eyes, and together we'll drift, gently, toward the most unforgettable exits history has ever whispered. Not the grand ones, not the noble ones, but the epic, the ironic, and the absolutely unrepeatable. Because tonight, we begin not with life, but with the strange poetry of death. Let's start with a king, one who could not be poisoned. Mithridates VI, ruler of Pontus in the 1st century BCE, was many things. A polyglot, a warrior, a paranoid chemist with a flair for personal survival. While most monarchs feared daggers in the dark, Mithridates feared venom in the wine, a far more civilized form of treachery. So he began a regimen that would make modern toxicologists weep with envy. Hemlock, arsenic, belladonna. He took them all, in carefully measured doses, gradually building up what seemed like total immunity. His personal physicians even concocted a serum, Mithridatium, so famous, medieval doctors were still chasing its recipe 1,000 years later. Mithridates didn't just eat food. He dared it to kill him, but then came Rome. Rome didn't care about his experiments. After years of war, betrayal, and blood, Mithridates found himself defeated, cornered, and unwilling to become a trophy in a Roman triumph. He turned to his old ally. Poison. But nothing happened. Years of self-made immunity had robbed him of a peaceful death. The ultimate irony. A man who trained his body to defy death could not die on his own terms. So he turned to one of his soldiers and whispered, "Do it manually." A sword did what science could not. And thus, the king who outlived poisons became history's most chemically prepared corpse. There's something soothing about these endings, don't you think? Not tragic, just ironic. A gentle reminder that no matter how prepared we are, fate carries a rusty blade. So stay with me. There's more to come. If you're enjoying the pace, don't forget to subscribe. And maybe share this with someone who also finds strange comfort in strange endings. Now, let's move forward, slowly, into our next demise. Not all epic deaths are coated in grandeur. Some are slow burns of irony, misjudgment, and cosmic timing that leaves even history itself blinking in disbelief. And for that, allow me to introduce you to the story of Emperor Jovianus Flammaeus. Though if you've never heard of him, don't worry. Most people haven't. Jovianus wasn't a household name, not even in his own empire. And yet the way he exited the mortal stage is enough to earn him a chapter in this sleepy chronicle. Now picture this. Late summer in the dusty provinces of the Eastern Roman Empire. The sun has no mercy here. It clings to the stones like a vengeful spirit. Jovianus had been traveling with a modest caravan, his entourage baking in layers of ceremonial armor and perfumed robes. The emperor, keen on appearing divine, was traveling in a chariot clad in gilded bronze, a rolling oven, essentially. It was a festival day, one of those half-pagan, half-Christian compromises of the era. Incense was burning, music played from flutes carved from bone and wood. Children tossed petals onto the road. It should have been a moment of imperial glory. Instead, it became a death march. The chariot, you see, had been retrofitted. Some overly eager court engineer, hoping to impress, had added a small furnace beneath the carriage floor. For warmth, he had said, and to symbolize the eternal flame of Rome, what it symbolized instead was the boiling point of hubris. The sun blazed overhead. The fire burned beneath. Trapped in ceremonial garb and hemmed in by adoring crowds, Jovianus had nowhere to go. Witnesses later claimed he waved cheerfully at The people, all while slowly roasting from below like some tragic festival goose. By the time the procession ended, the emperor collapsed. Heat stroke, they said. Dehydration. His skin reportedly blistered where his robes had pressed against the hot metal. But here's the kicker. Nobody noticed. Not for hours. They thought he had simply fallen asleep in divine ecstasy. By the time someone checked, he was as still and baked as a clay statue. And so ended Jovianus Flammeus, the emperor who tried to embody the eternal flame, and instead became a cautionary tale in temperature control. His death was never officially recorded. As such, the scrolls speak of a peaceful passing, but in the whispers of taverns and the snickers of servants, the truth endured. He had been cooked. Let us drift now to a different kind of finale. Not one of fire, but of cold, deliberate humiliation. The death of Tsarina Yekaterina Dolgorukova, the frost queen of forgotten winters. Unlike the emperors of warm lands, Yekaterina ruled a remote Russian duchy near the icy stretches of the White Sea. A woman of rigid rituals, she dressed only in black, bathed in milk, and was known to have her servants whisper prayers through keyholes before entering any room, paranoia perhaps, or just the fashion of isolation. Her court was frigid, in temperature and temperament. Guests often wore mittens indoors. Conversation froze mid-sentence. Yet she ruled with a precise, glacial grace. Until the scandal. They say it was a joke gone wrong. A visiting poet dared to suggest in a sonnet that the Tsarina's throne was built not on wisdom, but on inherited frostbite. The poem spread like wildfire, ironic given the setting. But in such courts, ridicule is treason. Yekaterina ordered his exile, but her court, already brittle from years of silence and fear, cracked. Servants began to whisper. Generals scoffed behind their beards. The Tsarina grew colder still. Then one morning, in the heart of winter, she was found in the grand hall, seated upright on her icy throne, eyes open, unmoving. Her skin had turned the hue of snow blindness. No wound, no poison, no sign of struggle. It was said she had frozen to death, in her own palace, in her own chair. Some say it was sabotage, a fire dampened, a window unlatched. Others believe she simply stopped moving, that her body, like her court, had become too still to survive. But here's where the story turns. A servant, a boy no older than 10, claimed to have heard her whisper something before the silence. Let them speak now. Let them feel the chill of legacy. Whether true or not, the phrase was carved into the stone behind her throne. And so ends another tale of a queen not beheaded, not overthrown, but claimed by the very element she ruled with. Her final protest, a statue of silence. Before we drift further, if your eyes are still open, consider this a gentle nudge. Like the snow over Yekaterina's palace, or the whispering heat beneath Jovianus's feet, the world is full of quiet warnings, strange, poetic, often absurd, and yet they echo. Rest your head now as the stories continue soon. Another page will turn. Another absurd exit awaits. But for now, let the silence hold you. Time, as it turns out, does not always tick quietly, especially not when it's tied to the misfortune of one Sir William Payne Galway, a British aristocrat, parliamentarian, and noted enthusiast of timepieces. In the mid-19th century, he had a fondness for collecting elaborate mechanical contraptions, including a rather ostentatious long-case clock. Towering, gilded, and fitted with a particularly loud chime, the piece had once belonged to a French nobleman who lost his head a few decades earlier, literally during the French Revolution. Payne Galway enjoyed showing off the clock to guests, often winding it with theatrical flair, its gears creaking like an old man with stiff knees. One stormy evening, as legend has it, he leaned in to adjust the mechanism. The clock, sensing its moment to shine, or perhaps simply fed up with decades of British humidity, chose that exact second to unburden itself of an internal spring. It snapped, cracked, and released a bolt of tightly wound tension directly into Sir William's chest. He staggered backward, stunned, clutching at his waistcoat. As the ticking grew louder, almost mocking, he died shortly after, not of time running out metaphorically, but because a timepiece literally struck back. There's something strangely poetic about being undone by an object meant to measure the passage of life. The man who prided himself on punctuality left this world a little too suddenly, all thanks to Victorian engineering and poor maintenance. Time waits for no one, and sometimes it lunges. Let us now drift westward to a grand perfumed room in Paris, where a fashion icon of her era, Isabelle Labatard, no relation to nobility despite the elaborate name, was preparing for an evening soiree. The year was 1785. Corsets were tight, politics tighter, and salons brimmed with whispered revolutions. Isabelle was known for her silhouette, impossibly narrow waist, layers of satin, and a powdered wig that brushed ceilings. She achieved her infamous figure not through moderation, but through the steel-boned corsets, imported at great cost from England, tightened with the kind of devotion usually reserved for cathedral construction. Her maid, Colette, was often overheard, muttering that one day the thing would simply snap her in two. That day came one July evening, just as Isabelle attempted a particularly ambitious lunge to catch a falling pearl earring. The corset, cinched to within inches of her life, proved a poor companion to acrobatics. She collapsed mid-lunge, breathless, unmoving. Doctors declared it a case of extreme fashionable suffocation, an elegant way of saying that vanity had claimed another. Isabelle's funeral was extravagant. Her corset was buried separately, as a symbol, perhaps, of pride taken too far. The eulogy reportedly included a line that read, "She died as she lived, restrained, rigid, and utterly admired." Now let us descend into something slightly more mechanical and far more damp. In 1916, Franz Reichelt had already made headlines with his flying coat, but he wasn't the only inventor to die dramatically at the hands of their own innovation. Meet Horace Lawson Hunley, a Confederate engineer who believed submarines would change the face of war. He wasn't wrong. He was just a little early. Hunley designed the first successful combat submarine, the H.L. Hunley, a long metal tube, powered by a crew turning a hand crank. It looked less like a marvel of engineering and more like something an anxious blacksmith would bury in the yard and deny knowledge of. During a test run in Charleston Harbor, Hunley insisted on joining. His crew, he wanted to be present for the historic voyage. Such a poetic vision, really. A commander diving into the sea with his machine. But the ocean, as always, had other plans. The Hunley submerged and did not return. Hours passed, then days. Eventually, divers found the vessel at the bottom, completely intact. Inside, the crew were all seated at their stations, as if waiting. Hunley himself was at the helm. No panic, no escape attempts. Just a fatal miscalculation of air supply. To this day, their preserved bodies serve as a macabre reminder. Some inventions are a bit too ahead of their time, and sometimes don't need to arrive at all. Let's soften our lanterns now and make our way to Renaissance Italy, where death came not in waves or gears, but in verse. Giovanni da Bianchini, an accomplished mathematician and poet, died in a way that can only be described as classically over the top. According to local tales, likely embroidered with romanticism, he met his end after reciting one of his own particularly moving poems aloud to a room of scholars and noblewomen. The subject, the fragility of life and the beauty of fleeting breath. As the final line left his lips, something about the kiss of the eternal wind, Giovanni clutched his chest, gave a single cough, and collapsed on the floor, apparently dead. One observer claimed it was the perfect exit for a poet, timed to the very syllable. His last line was carved into stone above his tomb. To this day, no one remembers the poem's structure, only the drama of its conclusion. An artist, after all, must know when to leave the stage. Take a moment now, breathe, stretch, let the stories settle. The candlelight flickers, faint and golden. Shadows stretch like memories along. The walls, you are safe still, warm in your bed. History, after all, can only haunt us with echoes, never touch us with hands. Now, before we continue, let this be your gentle reminder to like this episode if you're enjoying it so far. It helps the story reach others who, like you, find beauty in the quiet absurdity of history. Take another breath. Let it out slowly. Our next guest. A man so determined to cheat death that he forgot to respect it. But that comes after a brief pause. Shall we go on? The trouble with duels is that they are rarely about justice and almost always about pride. And pride, as history so often reminds us, is terribly combustible. Let us wander now into 18th century France, where honor was a fragile thing, and mustaches were often sharper than the swords beneath them. Our unfortunate character this time is Charles de Beaumont, a minor noble with a major temper, particularly when it came to people questioning the authenticity of his glass eye. You see, Charles had lost the original in a youthful accident involving a horse, a mirror, and what he later described as a very untrustworthy breeze. He replaced it with a lifelike prosthetic, hand-painted, exquisitely expensive, and unnervingly realistic. It became both his signature and his sore spot. If you looked too long, he assumed mockery. If you looked away too quickly, he assumed pity. One unfortunate night, after too much burgundy and not enough restraint, a rival noble, whose name history has kindly forgotten, made a joke, something about reflections and marbles. Charles demanded satisfaction. The duel was set at dawn. The next morning, mist hung thick over the fields. Witnesses say Charles insisted on removing his glass eye before the fight, declaring it unbecoming for a man to be stabbed while winking. He placed it delicately on a silk cloth, like a saint offering a relic. The duel began. 3 paces. Turn. Thrust. Charles tragically misjudged depth perception. His sword struck air. His opponents did not. And thus, the man who couldn't let a joke slide, slipped permanently into the past. Some say the glass eye was buried with him. Others claim it vanished, passed through generations as a cursed heirloom. Either way, let it be a lesson. If you must defend your honor, make sure you can see straight. And now, to the American frontier, a landscape of wide skies, dry whiskey, and dusty tempers. Here, we meet Elmer McCurdy, a man so unsuccessful, at everything, including dying, that he became famous for being misidentified, repeatedly, for decades. Born in 1880, McCurdy tried his hand at many things: plumbing, soldiering, bank robbery. None of them stuck. His criminal career was defined by poor planning and worse aim. During one infamous heist, he used too much nitroglycerin and blew the safe, along with the cash, into unspendable ash. In 1911, after robbing a train for $46 and a bottle of bourbon, he was cornered and shot dead in a barn. Modest enough ending, you'd think. But death, like fame, often has strange ideas. McCurdy's embalmed body was unclaimed, so the mortician propped it up and charged people to see the bandit who wouldn't die. He made more money than McCurdy ever did alive. Eventually, a traveling carnival bought the body, mistaking it for a wax figure. Over the decades, he passed from sideshow to haunted house to low-budget movie set, until, this is true, a TV crew, in the 1970s, tried to move what they thought was a mannequin, and the arm snapped off, revealing human bone. Elmer was finally buried in Oklahoma. Cement was poured over the coffin to ensure he stayed put this time. A man who wanted to be a legend ended up one by accident and wax. Sometimes history gives you what you want, just not how you planned. Let us return now to a colder place, Russia again. You remember Rasputin, of course, but now we visit a quieter corner of the empire. It is here we meet Olga Petrovna, a woman of sharp intellect, vast inheritance, and fatal table manners. Olga was a lover of etiquette books. She read them obsessively. Believed that proper posture could prevent war, that the right spoon could unlock diplomacy. Her dinners were legendary for their rules. Guests were expected to follow a strict choreography of nods, forks, glances. At one such dinner, while demonstrating the ideal aristocratic swallow with a particularly dense piece of sturgeon, Olga reportedly forgot to chew. The room fell silent. She turned pale. One guest later recalled she looked as if a ghost had taken offense. Within minutes she was gone, succumbed not to poison or revolution, but to her own obsession with elegance. She was laid to rest in silk gloves and a rigid corset, a final act of devotion to the very decorum that choked her. Sometimes, it seems, you can polish your manners to a lethal shine. From cold palaces, we now drift towards something warmer, sticky, much stickier. On a humid afternoon in 1919, in the north end of Boston, death came by molasses. The Purity Distilling Company had built an enormous tank, 50 feet tall, full of dark syrup waiting to be processed into rum. It groaned and hissed with the pressure of fermentation. But maintenance was lax, and inspections were more polite suggestions than enforced protocol. Then came the pop. Witnesses said it sounded like a muffled explosion. The tank ruptured. Over 2.3 million gallons of molasses surged out like a brown tidal wave. It moved at 35 miles per hour, fast enough to level buildings, throw horses, and trap people in a sticky embrace no one could escape. 21 died. Dozens more were injured. The cleanup took months. The lawsuits lasted years. And even now, on hot days, the neighborhood sometimes reports a faint scent of sugar and steel. It is, arguably, the slowest disaster in history and one of the stickiest. Take another breath now. The stories are strange, yes, but there's something comforting in their peculiarity, isn't there? People throughout history, trying so hard to live with dignity, only to exit with absurdity. As you lie there, warm beneath, your covers know this. You are part of a long tradition of strange, soft, sideways stories, of lives lived curiously, of ends that refuse to follow scripts. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's exactly what makes us human. Now, before we move to the next chapter, if you're still with me, consider leaving a comment. Maybe something simple. Tell me which tale surprised you most, or just say hello from your time zone. It's lovely to know who I'm falling asleep with, even across centuries. There's something oddly human about believing we'll go out with meaning, that we'll have time to say something profound, that death will wait until the room is properly lit, that the final moment will come with the sound of violins or, at the very least, dramatic thunder in the distance. But as this next chapter reminds us, death has no time for rehearsals, and the props don't always cooperate. Let us now drift into the candlelit halls of 18th century Vienna, a city of powdered wigs, political intrigue, and very, very heavy chandeliers. It was during an intimate soirée held by Countess von Straubenfeld, a known collector of rare wines and whispered rumours. The evening was lovely. Harpsichord music played, gossip bloomed like roses over silver goblets, and the Countess had just introduced a very new concept: dancing with lit candles on hats. Yes, candle hats. It was, according to her, symbolic of inner illumination. According to physics, it was a catastrophe waiting for ignition. But it wasn't the fire that claimed a life that evening. No, the true danger loomed above. One of the larger chandeliers, ornate, layered with crystal, strung with candles and dangerously overdue for repair, decided it had had enough. With a creak and groan that no one heard over the music, it came down, right onto the conductor. The man never saw it. One moment, he was lifting his hands for a grand crescendo. The next, he was part of the decor. They say the sound the chandelier made was more beautiful than the music it interrupted. It shimmered. It sang. And in that oddly poetic instant, the most dramatic note of the night came not from an instrument, but from gravity. A reminder that even elegance has edges, and sometimes they fall. Let's turn now to a man named Thomas Crapper. Yes, that's his real name. And yes, he worked with toilets. While not the inventor of the flush toilet, though history often credits him, he did popularize many of its components, brought plumbing into middle-class homes, and built an empire of convenience and porcelain dignity. But his death wasn't particularly unusual. It's his legend that refused to rest politely. Decades after his passing, during a Victorian revival of public sanitation interest, an apocryphal story surfaced that Crapper had died on a toilet, struck by a flaw in his own design. There's no historical proof, but the myth persists. A man so devoted to eliminating waste, undone by the very technology he improved. It's perfect, isn't it? Even the name feels invented. But no, he was real. He lived. He innovated. And though he likely died quietly in bed, generations would remember him differently, imagining him in a tiled bathroom, gasping at a valve, becoming the punchline to the world's longest plumbing joke. So here's to Thomas Crapper, the man whose legacy was flushed but never forgotten. Let's take a more solemn path now, to the American Civil War, where battlefields bled both glory and absurdity. There we find General John Sedgwick, a man of principle, bravery, and tragically, poor timing. It was May 1864, the Battle of Spotsylvania. Union troops were pinned down, nervous, dodging Confederate sharpshooters. Sedgwick, annoyed by the panic, stood tall, defiant. "Nonsense," he barked, as bullets whizzed past. They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance. And then they hit him, right in the face. He was dead before he finished the sentence. There is, of course, a lesson here, one about hubris, perhaps, or the importance of ducking, but mostly it's a reminder that fate has impeccable comedic timing. Sedgwick was remembered as a brave leader, but history remembers the sentence he never finished. And sometimes, that's the cruelest joke of all, that our final words are less profound epiphanies and more punchlines. Let us return, just briefly, to the land of scholars and sandals, ancient Greece, where philosophers often met unusual ends, as if their musings about death tempted it. Closer. This brings us to Empedocles, a pre-Socratic philosopher with an ego so large it eventually tried to vanish itself in style. Empedocles believed he was more than a man, possibly a god. He spoke in riddles, wore purple robes, and once claimed he could command the winds. And then one day, he announced he would ascend to Olympus and prove his divinity. His chosen method, leaping into Mount Etna. Yes, the volcano. The logic was interesting. He believed that by disappearing into the fiery depths, people would assume he had been taken by the gods, a divine vanishing act. But the volcano, uncooperative as ever, had other plans. According to legend, the mountain later spit out one of Empedocles' bronze sandals, ruined the illusion. Instead of divine transcendence, the people got a shoe. Today, he's remembered not as a deity, but as the man who jumped into a volcano and left behind evidence. There's something so wonderfully human about it, trying so hard to be eternal, and being undone by footwear, and finally for tonight, a quieter tale. One of ice, the death of Sir Francis Beaufort, British Admiral, creator of the Beaufort wind scale, the system sailors still use to measure wind strength. He was a master of observation, a man who believed every movement of nature could be described, numbered, classified. He lived into his 80s, a long life for his time. But as he lay dying in a cottage near the coast, he asked for the windows to be opened. He wanted to hear the sea one last time, to feel the wind. It was calm that day, Still. A whisper of breeze curled through the room. Someone leaned close and asked, "How strong would you say it is, sir?" And with a weak smile, Beaufort whispered, "Force 1. Then he died. No drama, no fire, just a breath of wind, measured, catalogued, the perfect ending for a man who spent his life trying to make sense of chaos. And now we rest. For tonight, we've wandered through chandeliers and candlelight, glass eyes and bronze sandals, pride, plumbing, and poetry. If you're still here, still drifting gently in the hush between thoughts, leave a little note, maybe your favorite, odd fact, or simply the name of a historical figure you hope gets mentioned in the next chapter. Let's keep each other company across centuries. Until then, breathe deep, sleep deeper. History will wait. Let's begin with a bridge, and a man who believed no fall was too great if you made it theatrical enough. Meet Charles Blondin. Born in 1824, he was a French tightrope walker, famed across continents for his feats of balance, bravery, and quiet lunacy. He didn't just walk tightropes, he danced on them, carried chairs across them. Once, he even stopped mid-walk to cook an omelette on a portable stove while suspended over Niagara Falls. Yes, you heard that correctly. The man made breakfast, mid-air. He crossed blindfolded. He crossed backwards. He carried people on his back. At one point, he even pushed a wheelbarrow filled with a stove. If performance could challenge gravity, Blondin had already rehearsed it. But death was patient. He didn't die on a rope, strangely enough. He lived into his 70s. His death was not the climax of a gasp-inducing stunt, but rather asthma, quiet, common, grounded. Still, his name became legend. Proof that some people spend their entire lives cheating death, only to be taken by something as invisible as breath. And maybe that's the trick. The show ends when no one's watching. From a man who tiptoed across air to a woman who leapt into the unknown, head first, in feathers. Her name was Franz. Reichelt Austrian-born, tailor, inventor, dreamer. We met him briefly earlier, but his death deserves more space, because it was one of the most poetically devastating exits ever captured on film. In 1912, Reichelt had a vision, a flying coat, a parachute you could wear. He tested it on dummies. They hit the ground like bags of flour. Still, he believed, and so, one February morning, he climbed to the first platform of the Eiffel Tower, wearing his prototype. Journalists were there, police. A crowd had gathered. He smiled, adjusted his collar, and leapt. It took less than 5 seconds. The coat never opened. The concrete didn't yield. He died on impact, instantly. But the cameras rolled, and to this day, you can watch the footage. Silent, grainy, surreal. A man in a cape, falling like a wounded bird. There's something indescribably tragic about it. He wasn't trying to impress. He was trying to save lives, to make falling survivable. But he miscalculated, and became his own cautionary tale. History remembered him not as a fool, but as the Flying Tailor, a name he might have appreciated, because even when the dream fails, the story still takes flight. Now, dim the lights even further. We're entering stranger territory. Our next tale belongs to Clement Vallandigham, an American lawyer, politician, and man of peculiar convictions. It was the 1870s, and Vallandigham had taken up a murder case. His client, accused of shooting a man during a bar fight, swore it was accidental, that the victim had shot himself while drawing his weapon. Vallandigham believed him, and in court, he vowed to prove it. So, he did what any logical defense attorney would do. He attempted to reenact the event. In his hotel room, with a pistol, a loaded pistol, he tucked it into his pants, fumbled like the deceased supposedly had, and pulled the trigger. A bang, a gasp, a silence. He had shot himself. Exactly as described. He died the next day, but the client was acquitted. Because, as the jury said, Vallandigham had proven it could have happened that way. He died for a courtroom demonstration, which may be the most committed form of closing argument in legal history. Tragic, absolutely, but also undeniably effective. Now let's wander into a more modern era, a place of neon signs, hissing steam vents, and suspiciously flammable stage sets. Enter Gareth Jones, a British actor, talented, intense, unlucky. In 1958, Gareth was starring in a live television play titled Underground. It was being broadcast live from a studio with no room for mistakes. Midway through the production, as the cameras rolled, Jones suffered a massive heart attack. But here's the twist. He wasn't on camera yet. He was off stage preparing for his next scene. His character was supposed to enter the frame shortly, but never did. The director, realizing something had gone wrong, improvised, rewrote lines on the spot, fed dialogue to other actors to explain his absence. And the show continued. It wasn't until after the broadcast ended that the audience learned the truth. The actor they were waiting for had died, just out of view. It's the most literal form of exit stage left you can imagine. And something haunting lingers in the thought that death might wait for your cue. Or not. Sometimes it just pulls the curtain early. And finally tonight, let us turn our gaze toward fire and a man named Sigurd the Mighty, a Viking, an Earl, a conqueror of northern Scotland in the 9th century, fierce in battle, proud in posture, and tragically unaware of dental hygiene as a lethal force. Sigurd defeated a rival noble in battle, beheaded him, and tied the head to his saddle as a trophy. Triumphant, he rode home, but the head, still armed with teeth, bounced against his leg as he galloped, and one of those teeth scraped his skin. The scratch became infected. Sigurd died days later. He had killed his enemy, dragged his head as proof of victory, and was killed by its last bite. A macabre twist. Fitting, somehow, for a Viking saga. You may conquer lands. But sometimes it's the smallest, grimmest details that finish the story. So what do we take from this chapter? That death is often strange, often ironic, rarely rehearsed. You might build wings and fall. You might fall and leave wings behind. You might prove your case and prove your own ending. But in each of these stories, however bizarre, they linger with a strange sense of balance, as though fate, even in its darkest mood, has a sense of humor. So now, breathe slowly. Let the images drift, of a man tumbling from a tower, coat flapping, of a chandelier whispering its final descent, of a Viking warrior undone by a tooth, and of an actor who never got his line, but got the last word anyway. The world is quiet now. Sleep if you can. Death has left the stage for tonight. Let's begin, in velvet, with golden goblets, perfumed halls, peacock feather fans, all the trappings of a monarchy so gilded it forgot one important detail. The human body still breaks. Our first tale belongs to King Adolf Frederick of Sweden. He ruled in the 18th century. A quiet monarch. A placeholder king, really. Known more for his stamp collection than any sweeping reform. But history didn't immortalize him for diplomacy, or war, or greatness. It remembered his stomach. Specifically, what he put into it. It was Fat Tuesday, the day before Lent, a time for indulgence, feasting before the fasting. And Adolf Frederick, like many kings before him, believed in going big. That day, he reportedly consumed lobster, caviar, smoked herring, champagne, and 14 servings of semla, cardamom-laced buns filled with almond paste and whipped cream, served in a bowl of warm milk. 14. He didn't make it to 15. Later that night, he complained of stomach pains. By morning, he was dead. The official cause. Digestive problems. A polite phrase, perhaps, for a royal body rebelling. after one dessert too many. He is now remembered solely as the king who ate himself to death. And somewhere in the archives of Swedish culinary history, there's a footnote reminding us, even the highest born can be felled by pastry. Now, travel with me to Rome, to one of its lesser-known emperors, Valerian, not one of the glamorous Caesars, not a philosopher king, but a man with one of the most humiliating fates in imperial history. Valerian ruled during the 3rd century CE, when the Roman Empire was more crack than marble. Civil wars, plagues, barbarians at every border. And Valerian tried to hold it together until the Battle of Edessa, where he and his army faced the Persians and lost. Badly. Valerian was taken alive, a rare, if not unprecedented, event. Now here's the part where a modern mind might imagine negotiations, diplomacy, prisoner exchanges, but this was ancient Persia, and King Shapur I had other ideas. He used Valerian, Rome's emperor, as a living footstool. Yes. Every time Shapur mounted his horse, Valerian was brought forward, forced to kneel, so the Persian king could step on his back. Daily, publicly, with ceremony. And when Valerian finally died, years into this degradation, Shapur had his body flayed, stuffed with straw, and put on display in a temple, a grotesque trophy, a warning, a performance of revenge. Rome, embarrassed, never officially acknowledged it. They pretended Valerian had simply disappeared, but his fate lived on in whispered tales. An emperor, turned into upholstery, proof that no matter how high you rise, there's always someone willing to step on your spine. Let's stay in the realm of monarchs and introduce you to George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence. You may remember him from the Wars of the Roses, a blood-slick civil conflict in England, where everyone with a title either betrayed someone or got betrayed. George was a brother to King Edward IV and also to Richard III. Yes, that Richard. But George had a flair for drama. He flipped sides during the war like a gambler chasing a winning hand, rebelled, repented, then plotted again. Eventually, the king had enough. George was convicted of treason, a problem, politically. Executing your own brother isn't exactly great PR. So, King Edward, ever the diplomat, reportedly let George choose his method of execution. And George, never one to do things simply, allegedly chose to be drowned in a barrel of Malmsey wine. Yes, a nobleman, soaked in sweet fortified drink, slipping beneath the surface of his own indulgence. Was it true? Historians argue. Some say it's legend, others swear by it. But the story stuck because it's so perfectly absurd. A traitor, undone by vintage, a wine-soaked end to a vine-entwined life. They buried him in Westminster Abbey, dry by then, but forever remembered as the man who chose a liquid exit. Now, let's move east, to the frost and mysticism of Imperial Russia, where a man named Grigory Rasputin made death seem like a complicated hobby. We touched on him earlier, but like most strange things, Rasputin deserves a second look. He was a mystic, a healer, a hypnotist, a holy man perhaps, or a manipulator. History remains undecided. He wormed his way into the heart of the Russian royal family, became indispensable to the Tsarina, a voice in their ear, a shadow in the nursery, and the nobility hated him. So they planned his murder. Poison was first, cyanide in cakes and wine. He ate it all, smiled, asked for more. So they shot him. He collapsed. Dead, they thought. Then he got up. So they shot him. Again. And again. Then they beat him. Still alive. Finally, in an act of sheer desperation, they bound him and threw him into the frozen Neva River. Days later, when his body was found, his arms were raised, as though he'd tried to claw through the ice from below. Poetic? Absolutely. True? Perhaps embellished. But the legend of Rasputin's death became the gold standard of overkill. Poison, bullets, ice, and still, it took all three. Let us now drift into something quieter, a different kind of end. Meet Chrysippus of Soli, a Stoic, philosopher, wise, respected. The kind of man who taught restraint, logic, and the nobility of suffering. He spent his life preaching about control, emotional discipline, stoicism in the face of chaos, until one day he saw a donkey eating figs. That's it, a donkey chomping down on fruit. And in a moment of brilliance, Chrysippus turned to his servant and said, "Give the donkey some wine to wash down the figs." And then he laughed. He laughed so hard, so violently, that he died. A fit of laughter, gasping, collapsing, done. The Stoic, undone not by war or age, but by his own punchline. He died the way comedians dream to, mid-joke. And perhaps somewhere, in the quiet halls of Stoic philosophy, a fellow scholar simply nodded and said, well, at least he committed. So, in this dim hour, let's pause. We've seen kings fall to cakes, emperors turned into rugs, philosophers chuckled into the afterlife, and each of them, in some small, peculiar way, reminds us of the strange balance between dignity and absurdity. Death doesn't always arrive with a scythe. Sometimes it comes with a wine glass, a donkey, a slipper, or nothing at all. So rest now. Let the absurdities quiet into a hush, and know this. Tomorrow, we'll meet inventors who invented their exits, and rebels who refused to die quietly. But for now, close your eyes, and let these strange kings walk off into the fog. The curtain has not fallen, it's simply swaying. Let's begin with a man who tried to fly, not metaphorically, literally. Franz Reichelt was a tailor, but not just any tailor. He was the kind of dreamer who looked up at the Eiffel Tower and thought, yes, that's where I'll prove the world wrong. It was 1912. Paris. Aviators were the rock stars of the age, and Franz had a vision to create a wearable parachute, a coat that could unfold into wings, a device that would let men fall from the skies and walk away, elegantly, in linen and pride. He tested his designs on dummies. Mostly they crashed, but still, Franz believed. So he took it to the tower. Clad in his flying coat, bulky, stiff, more like a collapsed tent than a garment, he climbed the first platform of the Eiffel Tower. The police tried to stop him. Friends begged him not to jump, but Franz, flush with press attention and adrenaline, stepped to the edge. A crowd below gasped, and he leapt. The coat flapped. Once, then did nothing at all. He fell like a rag doll wrapped in ambition. He died instantly. They measured the crater, studied the twisted coat. The press called it the flying tailor's final stitch. And in a way, Franz got what he wanted, to be remembered. But perhaps not as he hoped. A man who stitched his dream into fabric and let gravity do the editing. Let's travel further back. To ancient Greece. And one of history's sharpest minds, Archimedes. You know his name. You may recall the story, the bath, the buoyancy, the jubilant naked sprint through the streets, yelling, "Eureka!" But that's not how he left us. Archimedes was in Syracuse when Roman soldiers finally breached the city. Amid the chaos, smoke, and screaming, Archimedes remained, focused. He was bent over a sand diagram, circles, geometry, the language of the cosmos. A Roman soldier entered. Archimedes, without looking up, muttered, "Do not disturb my circles." And the soldier, perhaps not a fan of math, or simply following orders, killed him. No ceremony, no dueling intellects, just steel and silence. Later, the Roman general, Marcellus, furious, declared that Archimedes was to be spared. But it was too late. The mind that could bend water, build mirrors that burned, our ships and calculate the volume of a crown, was gone, slain by impatience or ignorance, or both. Proof that brilliance may illuminate the world, but it does not always protect you from it. Now, something quieter. Let me introduce Sei Shonagon, court lady, writer, and mistress of lists. In 10th century Japan, she penned The Pillow book, a collection of reflections, observations, and delightfully sharp judgments. It's filled with things that are elegant, annoying, awkward, or things that make the heart beat faster. She didn't die dramatically. There's no bloody betrayal, no great fall. In fact, we don't know how she died, at all. Her final days are undocumented. She simply vanished. But her book survived, and in it a kind of immortality, not of conquest or glory, but of fleeting details. The rustle of silk, a certain shade of blue, the way dew gathers on a lotus leaf before dawn. Not all epic deaths come with blood. Some come with silence and sentences that refuse to disappear. Let's shift now to the bizarre. To a man whose name sounds like he was born inside a thunderclap. Isambard Kingdom Brunel, engineer. Visionary. Master of bridges, tunnels and ships too large for common sense. In the 19th century, he built the Great Western Railway, the Clifton Suspension Bridge, and the SS Great Eastern, a steamship so massive it seemed to defy the ocean. But that ship, it was cursed. During its construction, workers died. A man got sealed inside a hull. Fires broke out. Launches failed. Still, Brunel pressed on. Chain-smoking cigars, managing stress like it was a full-time job. And then, on the eve of the ship's maiden voyage, while watching a demonstration, he collapsed. A stroke. He died days later. And then, as if scripted, the ship exploded on its first outing. A pipe burst, several dead. The dream held together by math and madness had buckled under its own weight. Brunel was buried. The ship limped on, and history sighed. Sometimes genius dies not in failure, but in fulfillment. He reached the end of his blueprint, and the last thing he ever built was the machine that broke him. Come now to something oddly poetic. Chrysippus laughed himself to death. Franz Reichelt fell by his own invention. Brunel died beneath the weight of his vision. These are not grand assassinations. They are not battlefield finales. They are stories where irony is the blade, where genius becomes its own undoing, where the final act is so perfectly fitting. It almost feels like someone upstairs was writing punchlines. So let your thoughts drift. Let the edge of absurdity blur into quiet awe. History, it seems, rarely writes death in straight lines. More often, it curves, dips, doubles back, adds a flourish, a puff of irony, a final brushstroke, a note held one beat too long, and we, the readers of the dead, can only marvel at how even the sharpest minds, the boldest hearts, the greatest ambitions, still fall, one way or another. Next, we'll meet rebels who dared to carve their legacy with blades, not blueprints. Deaths that shook empires, or tried to. But for now, let the quiet settle. Let absurdity become a hum in the distance. And sleep, that most ordinary of disappearances, fold you softly into its arms. Let's start with a man whose name still thunders through history's bloodstream. Spartacus. Yes, that Spartacus. The gladiator, the rebel, the man who fought not for a kingdom, but to escape one. In 73 BCE, Spartacus, once a soldier, then a slave, finally a gladiator, broke free from the ludus in Capua, a brutal combat school where men learned to die for entertainment. He and about 70 others armed themselves with whatever they could find. Kitchen knives, wooden swords, pieces of broken dreams, and ran. They didn't plan a revolution, they just wanted out. But freedom has a way of growing. What started as an escape became a movement. Thousands joined. Slaves, fugitives, the forgotten. They defeated Roman patrols, then legions. It was embarrassing. Rome, the iron-fisted architect of order, was being humiliated by a band of barefoot exiles led by a Thracian with charisma and a sword. For 2 years, Spartacus outmaneuvered generals, played politics, and defied capture. Then came Crassus, the richest man in Rome, who traded his gold for glory and was tasked with ending the rebellion. Eventually, the rebels were cornered in southern Italy. No food, no allies, no exit. Spartacus didn't surrender. He charged, straight into the heart of Roman steel. He fought until his body could no longer be found, swallowed by the chaos, never displayed, never paraded. And yet, it was Rome that made the statement loud and clear. 6,000 of his followers were crucified along the Appian Way, a spine of warning stretching from the battlefield to the capital. But they couldn't kill the legend, because Spartacus didn't die begging. He died swinging. And sometimes, that's all it takes to live forever. Now meet Boudica, queen of the Iceni, scourge of Rome, and a woman who decided to burn everything on her way out. It was 60 C. Her husband had died, a client king under Roman rule. And though he tried to leave the kingdom to both Rome and his daughters, the Romans ignored the will. They flogged Boudica. Publicly, they violated her daughters, violently, and Boudica burned, not with grief, but with vengeance. She gathered tribes, united enemies, and led a rebellion so fierce it made the legions sweat. She burned Roman settlements, slaughtered entire garrisons, and razed Londinium, what we now call London. To ash, tens of thousands died. The empire staggered. Eventually, of course, Rome retaliated with overwhelming force. A trap was set. The battle was lost. But Boudica, refusing to be paraded in chains like so many before her, chose poison, a queen's exit. Silent, controlled. The fire she lit raged far beyond her grave. Today, statues of her still stand in London, iron-willed, arms outstretched, daughters beside her. The woman who burned Rome's arrogance to the ground and walked away without asking for forgiveness. Let's pause briefly on a name that history almost buried. Hypatia, 4th century Alexandria. A mathematician, astronomer, philosopher, a woman in a man's world who didn't flinch. She taught publicly, wrote commentaries on Euclid, advised governors, and did all of this in a time when the old pagan world was being overtaken by a rising tide of Christian fervor. To some, she was brilliance incarnate. To others, a dangerous symbol of a fading world. In 415 CE, a mob, reportedly fueled by religious zealotry, dragged Hypatia from her chariot. They stripped her, they flayed her with tiles, they burned her remains. This wasn't a killing, it was an erasure, but it didn't work. Her name survived. Her work echoed in the pages of her students, whispered into later generations. Even centuries later, when her writings were gone, the idea of her endured. A martyr of reason, an oracle, of intellect drowned in fanaticism. Her death was meant to silence. Instead, it haunts. Let's fast forward to the American frontier, to a man named Jesse James, not a freedom fighter, not a philosopher, an outlaw. But legends don't always come from noble soil. Jesse robbed banks, trains, and rich people who'd never faced a consequence in their lives. To some, he was a hero. To others, a menace. But he had style, he had grit, and he had enemies. In 1882, Jesse was betrayed by Robert Ford, a gang member and supposed friend. One morning, while Jesse was adjusting a picture frame on the wall, unarmed, relaxed, Ford shot him in the back of the head. He died mid-sentence, mid-chore, no duel, no blaze of glory, just treachery. And the public? They hated Ford, because even a criminal, when bold enough, can become myth. Jesse James died in his socks, dusting furniture, But the world remembers the pistol, the horse, the legend. Sometimes it's not what you were, it's how you refused to go quietly. These are not gentle deaths. They are jagged, loud, stained with blood and bitterness. But listen to them closely, and there's something deeper. Each of these rebels, Spartacus, Boudica, Hypatia, Jesse, died for something they wouldn't surrender. Dignity, defiance, thought, control. They didn't die because they were weak. They died because the world had no idea what to do with their strength. So let the fire dim to embers now. The blades are silent, the gallows empty, and in the hush between heartbeats, imagine them, riding, charging, speaking, smiling, still alive in the echo. Because death doesn't always mean silence. Sometimes it's a shout that just won't stop ringing. Let us begin with one of the most ironically excessive exits of them all, the death of Rasputin, the Russian mystic whose end felt more like a checklist for how not to die. You probably know the name. Beard like a prophet, eyes like a fever, dreamed-up body like it refused to acknowledge physics. Rasputin wormed his way into the Romanov court in early 20th century Russia, winning the favor of Tsarina Alexandra by allegedly easing the pain of her hemophiliac son. To some, he was a healer. To others, a parasite in velvet robes. The Russian aristocracy hated him, but the Tsarina loved him, and that was a problem. So they conspired, and they plotted. And one night in 1916, they acted. First, they lured him to a dinner party, a cozy gathering, candles, wine, a few cakes laced with cyanide. He ate, he drank, he laughed. No vomiting, no fainting, no dying. Slightly annoyed, they shot him. He fell. Good. But when they leaned in to check the body, Rasputin sat up like a ghoul, or a man who simply did not care for being interrupted. More panic, more gunshots. He fled, out the door, into the snow. They chased him down, beat him, bound him, and threw him into the Neva River. When his body was recovered, his arms were reportedly raised, frozen in an upward clawing motion, trying to escape the river's hold. Trying, even then, not to go quietly. It took poison, bullets, blunt trauma, drowning, and Russia's full determination to end one man. Some call it myth, some say exaggeration. But what's important is this. Rasputin died the way he lived, unkillable, until he wasn't. Now let's stroll back in time, to a philosopher, a man of logic, self-control, and, as it turns out, surprisingly fragile lungs. Chrysippus, Stoic philosopher, ancient Greece. He taught about virtue, reason, and endurance. He believed that emotion must not overpower thought, that one must always remain composed. And then, one day, while observing a donkey eating a fig, he made a joke, a harmless joke. "Give the donkey some wine to wash it down," he quipped to his servant. And then he laughed, and laughed, and kept laughing, until he died. Yes, Chrysippus, the Stoic, perished from joy, a fatal punchline. Laughter, the very emotion he often advised should be tempered, became his final, irresistible guest. They found him collapsed, smiling, possibly mid-wheeze. And there's something deeply human about that, isn't there? A man who taught restraint, undone by a donkey and fermented fruit. He didn't lose control often, but when he did, it killed him. Not all exits are accidental. Some are curated, framed, choreographed. Consider Seneca the Younger. Stoic philosopher, advisor to Emperor Nero, and man of expensive taste paired with morbid wisdom. Seneca knew his position was fragile. Working with Nero was like babysitting a bonfire. And sure enough, when Nero began purging his enemies, Seneca's name made the list. Rather than fight, he was offered the courtesy of suicide, a polite execution. Roman style. Seneca accepted. With eerie calm, he bathed, he dined, he called his closest friends, and then opened his veins. Not in a back room, not alone, but in the middle of a gathering. His wife tried to join him. He pleaded for her to live. Then he gave a final philosophical monologue as the blood drained from his limbs. Slow, ceremonial, patient. When the bleeding was too slow, he drank hemlock to speed it along. Even his death had layers. Seneca didn't just die. He gave a performance. One last stoic lecture, spoken not in words, but in silence and suffering. It was as though he was saying, if you're going to kill me, let me do it properly. And then we have Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor, with a name like a thunderstorm and a death like a punchline. He led a massive army during the Third Crusade, marching proudly to the Holy Land, armored, regal, majestic. And then, on June 10th, 1190, somewhere in the mountains of Anatolia, he tried to cross a river. No battle, no enemy in sight, just a river. Accounts vary. Some say he tried to swim. Some say he slipped. Some say he fell from his horse. All agree on one thing. Frederick Barbarossa, Emperor of Christendom, leader of tens of thousands, drowned in waist-deep water. The news devastated his army. Men refused to continue. Some turned back. Some broke into open mourning. Others, probably, just stared at the river, wondering how a man who had survived decades of war was claimed by a wet rock. It wasn't the crusade that killed him. It was the current. Proof that sometimes the most epic lives trip on the smallest stones. And finally, Isadora Duncan, a pioneer of modern dance, a woman who twirled through life, barefoot and unapologetic, wearing scarves like wings. She hated convention, lived passionately, loved wildly. In 1927, she stepped into a car in Nice, France. Her long, flowing scarf trailed behind her. Dramatic, crimson, perfect. Too perfect. It caught in the open-spoked wheel of the car, snapped taut, and in an instant, Isadora was yanked from the vehicle, her neck broken. The scarf had become a noose, the very accessory that symbolized her freedom, her flair, her theatrical soul, became her executioner. Newspapers wrote headlines with almost cruel wit. Dancer killed by scarf. But the truth is, even in death, she remained herself, flamboyant, tragic, memorable, like a final pirouette into history's strangest curtain call. Some people die quietly, some die gloriously, but a few can't help but die dramatically. Not because they wanted to, but because they lived too loud to exit with a whisper. So whether it's Rasputin clawing through the ice, or a philosopher laughing himself into the afterlife, there's always someone out there reminding us that death can be absurd, it can be theatrical, it can even be poetic, and in the right lighting, it becomes unforgettable. Some people leave behind monuments, others, cautionary tales, and some, like Girolamo Savonarola, leave behind the kind of silence that lingers for centuries. Florence, late 1400s. The city was a jewel of the Renaissance, glowing with art, bursting with wealth, simmering with sin. Enter Savonarola, a Dominican friar with fire in his sermons and ash in his eyes. He didn't preach peace. He preached purging, of vanity, of excess, of paintings, books, mirrors, dice, playing cards, anything that might tempt the soul from God's light. And Florence listened. In 1497, they staged the bonfire of the vanities, literally. They burned everything that glittered. It was a moment of mass guilt, a flash of piety wrapped in smoke, but the flame, as always, turned back on its master. A year later, the tide turned. People got tired of fire. They missed music, makeup, and indulgence. Savonarola was excommunicated, arrested, tortured, and finally burned in the very square where his bonfire once roared. His last words? Not recorded, just the crackle of flames that once obeyed him, now unmaking him. The ash of irony drifts heavier than most. Then we meet a man of ink and thunder, Voltaire. Not known for swords but for sentences, a mind so sharp it made kings flinch. He mocked dogma, shredded superstition, dined with aristocrats while simultaneously setting fire to their ideals. But Voltaire feared one thing above all: being buried in a church. He was a deist, yes, but a fan of organized religion? Absolutely not. When he died in 1778, his enemies tried to deny him a proper burial. A priest refused the rites, but Voltaire, being Voltaire, had already planned for this. He died in a house owned by friends, and those friends quietly shipped his body away, smuggled it to a countryside abbey, where a more liberal monk gave him a decent, if slightly clandestine, burial. 50 years later, France brought him back to Paris. They buried him in the Pantheon, right next to Rousseau. One scholar famously quipped, "Even in death, Voltaire had the last word, because you can deny a man a funeral, but you can't outwit his ghost." Now, let's journey to Japan, 1970, where a man named Yukio Mishima turned his life into literature and his death into legend. Mishima was a writer, a nationalist, a man who lived in obsession with honor, discipline, and beauty. He staged his life like a kabuki play, dramatic, precise, and deeply stylized. Then one morning, he and a handful of loyal followers stormed a military base. Their demand? That Japan restore imperial rule. The soldiers laughed. So Mishima, standing on a balcony, gave a speech, a manifesto really. When the soldiers heckled him, he turned, walked inside, and committed seppuku, ritual disembowelment. It wasn't clean, it wasn't graceful. His assistant fumbled the sword strike meant to finish the job. It took several tries. The scene was gruesome, but Mishima had planned it all. His death, his spectacle, his message. He died for an idea that no longer existed, in a world that had moved on. A performance, a tragedy, and a question that still haunts Japan. Not every legacy ends in blood. Some end in bone. Like Ötzi the Iceman, the world's most unexpected time traveler. Found in 1991, frozen in the Alps for over 5,000 years. At first, they thought it was a lost hiker, but as archaeologists unwrapped the ice, they found something else. A copper axe, a full stomach of unleavened bread and ibex meat, tattoos, flint tools, an arrow wound in his shoulder. Ötzi hadn't wandered into the snow and perished. He'd been killed, shot, likely ambushed, possibly betrayed. His body preserved by the ice, his mystery left thawing slowly under forensic lights. What's astonishing isn't just the age, it's the intimacy. We know what he ate, what he wore, what he carried. We even know he had arthritis in his knees and likely had bad breath. Ötzi became a celebrity of the ancient world. A man with no name, no grave, but more fans than most pharaohs. He didn't plan to be remembered. He simply wasn't forgotten. And sometimes, death doesn't just follow a man, it chases him across decades, like Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the man who survived 2 atomic bombs. Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. Yamaguchi was there on a business trip. He saw the flash, felt the heat, and survived the explosion. Burned, dazed, he returned, home to, of all places, Nagasaki, 3 days later. He was explaining to his boss what had happened when the second bomb hit. Again he survived, and this time he lived, really lived, to tell the tale. For decades, no one believed him. 2 bombs, impossible, until documents confirmed it. He died in 2010 of stomach cancer, aged 93. His life was a living contradiction, born in war, twice marked by the apocalypse, yet surviving longer than many who never knew fire. Yamaguchi didn't ask to be history's footnote, but he became something stranger, a man whose body carried 2 shadows. And then there are those who die once, but are buried twice, like Oliver Cromwell, Lord Protector of England. tyrant to some, savior to others. He died in 1658 of natural causes, buried with honors. But then, the monarchy returned, and the new king, Charles II, son of the man Cromwell helped execute, decided to make a statement. He had Cromwell's body exhumed, posthumously hanged, and beheaded. His skull was placed on a spike atop Westminster Hall. It stayed there for 20 years, blown by wind, peered at by birds, eventually stolen, passed around, hidden. For centuries, Cromwell's skull changed hands like a cursed relic. It wasn't buried, truly, until 1960. 300 years after, his second death, proof that sometimes being remembered is the longest punishment of all. Death doesn't care for symmetry. It comes with flair, with chaos, with gentle shrugs or grand gestures. Some leave behind fire, others frost. But all of them, even the forgotten, leave echoes, which we still hear, even now, even here, even as you drift towards sleep, listening to the long hush of lives once loud. And if their exits teach us anything, it's this. There is no such thing as a quiet ending, only quieter beginnings. So here we are, the end of our long procession, our twilight parade of kings and philosophers, rebels and mystics, dreamers and disasters, each one leaving the world in their own quietly thunderous way. And yet, what is it that makes a death epic? Is it the drama, the absurdity, the poetry? Or maybe, just maybe, it's the way we remember them. Take Félix IV, President of France. Respected, dignified, and reportedly struck down mid-romance in his office, with a certain companion whose name the newspapers politely left out. Rumour has it that as he died, gasping, aides scrambled to button his shirt and preserve presidential dignity. But history, of course, already had the punchline written. Voltaire might have approved. Or consider Jean-Baptiste Lully, royal, composer to Louis XIV. He was conducting a grand Te Deum with a long staff, as was tradition, pounding it on the floor to keep time. He struck his foot, developed gangrene, refused amputation because it would end his dancing, and died, conducting praise for life while bleeding toward death. A metaphor in 3 acts. Not every death makes it into textbooks. Some drift, some whisper, but they still matter. They ripple through the present like threads we can barely feel, yet follow all the same. You and I, we are the quiet beneficiaries of these strange exits. Every absurd ending, every tragic tumble, every poetic twist. They remind us that humanity has never really changed. We're still foolish, still brilliant, still fragile and absurdly hopeful. We still choke on dessert, still challenge the gods, still trip on roof tiles and fall into legend. And perhaps that's the comfort, isn't it? To know that even the greatest among us, the kings, the prophets, the thinkers, left not in fire or thunder, but often in laughter, in irony, or in absolute absurdity. A philosopher who died laughing at a donkey, a queen who faded like mist, a king felled by soup, and all of it, somehow, meaningful. So now, with the hour growing late, and your thoughts slowing like a pendulum in deep water, I invite you, gently, to close your eyes and let go. Let go of the day, of the noise, of the sharp corners of memory. Let these lives blur at the edges, until all that remains are shadows and the soft hum of time. And as you drift, ask yourself, not with urgency, but with wonder, when the curtain falls, what story will linger in your echo? Will it be grand, quiet, or just beautifully strange? No need to answer tonight. There's time. There's always time. If you enjoyed this sleepy journey through history's strangest exits, be sure to subscribe, like, or leave a quiet comment with your favorite bizarre farewell. Not for algorithms, but for the campfire, for the next weary soul seeking a lullaby made of truth and ash. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, And may your exit, whenever it comes, be unforgettable in the best possible way. Good night.